I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today, I have my special guest. He's award winning author and the author of the book The Fall of Faith. No other than Mr. Jeff Berney. Mr. Jeff, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Daniel. It's great to be here. As you said, my name is Jeff Berney. I'm a thriller author. Um, that's my night gig. During the day, I am a creative director at an advertising agency. So I do get to be creative for a living, but telling my own stories that kind of have a dark soul to them is my passion. I've got 7 kids, an amazing wife who is nice enough to give me time and room to spend with all these fictional characters that take up a lot of space. And yeah, I enjoy writing stories that make people think and maybe scare them a bit.
That sounds interesting, Mr. Jeff. So, what is the big difference of being creative as a profession and being an author?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love working in advertising. I've done it for gosh over 25 years now. Getting to be creative, getting to come up with things that influence and affect other people. But the difference is, you're always writing from somebody else's point of view when you're working for a client. Your ideas can be vetoed based on what the client likes and wants and needs, and that's totally fine. You're working for them at that point. But writing a book is, it's that deeper kind of internal exploration. For me, I'm a very slow writer, not just because I write mostly at night, but because I really dive in deep to my characters and get to know them and kind of explore how they feel and act and affect what they do and create those interactions between the people that I'm writing about. And so for me, that's kind of a very cool extra creative outlet when I get to create the world that I'm playing in.
What age did you realize that you're good in writing?
Ooh, I don't know that I realized that I'm good in writing. You know, I'm one of I'm one of those people that, you could tell me 1,000 times, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing," and one person says, "Oh, this is awful." I have a hard time focusing on those 1,000 words of praise and, really laser focus on, what can I do better so that one person uh, enjoys my writing. I'm working on that. But I think, for me, I've always been very introverted, very kind of in my own world or in my own head. And so bringing that world to life on the page has been something that I've wanted to do for a very long time. I've written creatively since I could hold a pencil. And so it's always just been a passion for me, and I'm happy that I'm able to explore it. Yes, I am an architect. I outline, I know the ending before I go in. Now, there are things that happen as I'm writing that I didn't expect, and I allow those to happen. But I kind of have the high points. It's funny because I'm working on an early draft co-writing with another writer friend of mine, and I've never co-written before. And he's definitely a gardener, and so I'm trying to try that out with this kind of co-writing book. It's interesting. I don't think that it's not natural for me, if that makes sense.
Very well said, Mr. Jeff. So, what are your short term and long term goals in writing?
Short term, I just want to write stories um, that make people think, that kind of stay with you even after you close the book. You know that I've always been drawn to thrillers. I love kind of the dark thrillers, the twists that you don't see coming. Um, but for me, at least, you know, once I close the page and go to the next book, it a lot of that gets gets lost. You know, it's I've read the book, I enjoyed it while I was reading it, but it doesn't really stay with me. And so I try to infuse a little bit of that into my thrillers, so that they do have kind of that bigger overarching theme without being preachy, that stays with you. And so short term, I just want to continue to write stories like that. Long term, I'd love this to be, you know, my full-time career at some point. I can imagine, you know, retiring from advertising and just spending my days writing novels. That to me sounds like an amazing way to live out my retirement years.
Who are your favorite authors that influence you the most?
I feel like everybody says Stephen King, but he is just so prolific and amazing. So he's definitely one that I read. I probably started reading him when I was too young and shouldn't have read him. Um, but he's always been one of my favorites. John Irving is another huge influence, which is interesting. You know, I go from Stephen King, who is this amazing kind of horror um, writer, to John Irving, who was more of, you know, very literary voice, you know, author of some great American novels. But that's kind of, you know, for me, it's that weird dichotomy. But I try to bring those two opposing writing styles into how I write. I would say that my writing style is it is action forward. I do realize that, you know, most readers today, they want the plot to move pretty fast, right? You know, you don't want to get bogged down in a lot of story. But I do like to bring those backstories. I want people to, when they're reading my book, feel like they're reading about real people. You know, someone that they either recognize in someone that they know in real life, or someone that is so fleshed out on the page that they feel like, you know, I could meet this person tomorrow and know everything about them, and maybe we could be friends. Maybe I would be scared to death of them, depending on, you know, the character that it is in the book. But I want them to feel like these are real people doing realistic type things. Obviously, you know, it. I write novels, so things are over the top, but I try to infuse that realism throughout.
Mr. Jeff, how do you deal with the writer's block?
You know, it's taken me a long time, and like I said, you know, I write for a living, so I write every day in advertising as well as writing novels. And so for me, what I've realized works the best is you just have to walk away from what you're working on, give your brain a break, think about something else. And usually, what I've found is, you know, my subconscious kind of keeps working on the problem, you know, picking at it and looking at it from different angles. And by the time I come back, a lot of times I'm surprised I haven't consciously figured it out, but I sit down at the computer again, and for the most part, things start flowing. So for me, it's really being patient with myself and giving myself that space to say, okay, it's time to walk away. I'm not wasting time. What I'm doing is giving myself time to figure out a solution that will work best.
Mr. Jeff, what's your daily writing routine like?
I get up early. I will write before I have to go to work. I'll write a little bit right after work. And right now, that's kind of the only time I've got. I used to write really late into the evenings. Life has just been so hectic here at our house that I'm just exhausted by the time it's bedtime and all the kids are in bed. So I don't want to spend that time. I feel like if I write when I'm super tired, then there's going to be a lot of editing the next day, and I really want to be able to focus when I'm writing. So I've I've tried to figure out my best schedule, and right now that is before work and a little bit after work, and that's why it takes me it could take me a year or two to finish one novel, and I know that that sounds like a really long time for a lot of authors, and I have friends who are authors who will write a book in 2 or 3 months, and I love that for them. But it's just not how I write. It's not how I think. It takes me a while. I think I have to figure the story out in my own head before I can put it down on paper. And so I make sure that again I kind of give myself that space so that I can think through things, so that when I do sit down to write, I'm able to the words are able to flow better, and there's not as much um, back and forth with editing, and I don't feel like I've wasted a day of writing when I come back and have to delete everything that I did yesterday.
So, Jeff, how do you feel your personal experiences have shaped your writing?
um, you know I used to think my writing is separate, but um, a lot of times subconsciously, like, things will come into my writing that I realize, oh yeah, that's something that my dad does, or that's a story that I heard from my brother-in-law like 3 years ago. So kind of those personal experiences and stories that I've heard throughout my life kind of seep into my work, not directly and not word for word, but kind of the essence of them. Whenever I hear something that's interesting, I'll try to jot it down, and maybe it'll come to life in a totally different way when I do incorporate it. But I think the biggest thing, I write really dark thrillers. I don't write Hollywood happy endings. And so a lot of people have asked, what's wrong with you? My mom has said, I don't understand you. Um, but it's interesting because I have a great life. I love my life. I have an amazing family. But when I write, it comes out really dark. And for me, I think maybe that's, cathartic. Maybe it's a little bit of self therapy. I'm getting those bad things out, um, and I'm writing interesting stories that I think hopefully are compelling, maybe a little bit twisted, but I think in a world where things are crazy already, if I can be over the top crazy, then maybe the world doesn't seem so bad.
Yes, very well said, Mr. Jeff. So, can you tell us about your award winning piece?
Yes. So my latest novel is called The Fall of Faith, and it's a gritty domestic thriller. So it's almost, you can almost say it's a romantic thriller, although it's not a typical stereotypical romance at all. Like I said, I don't do Hollywood happy endings, but it is about lust and love, and really the consequences of doing whatever it takes to survive and live the life that you want to live. Um, for me, the big question going into this book was, how far would you go to be a part of something bigger than yourself? And maybe that's, faith as in religion. Maybe that's faith as in understanding who you are and being true to that. Maybe it's faith in um, really putting yourself out there and trusting someone else with your heart and with your life. And so that's the question that my main character grapples with. His name's Jimmy. He's a an over the road truck driver, so he drives a big rig truck up and down the highways of Middle America, and he's on his last run. He's about to retire. He's about to finally, he's been in motion his entire adult life, kind of watching the world go by through the windshield, and he's ready to live instead of just passing through. But his truck breaks down in a little town in the middle of nowhere, and he meets and interacts with all kinds of colorful, crazy townsfolk. And soon he finds himself falling in love with with a woman who's not your typical heroine, not your typical damsel in distress, and danger kind of closes in on him from every angle. And so you don't know if he's going to find love. You don't know if he's even going to make it out of this small town alive. And you don't know until the end if everything's going to work out and that faith is misplaced and misguided, or what brings him to a better life.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Jeff. But before we go on, I want to shout out to the people listening in Indonesia, truly Asia, because in Jakarta I got 57% audience share, West Java 14%, Bali at 11%, Central Java at 9%, East Java at 5%, Jambi at 2%, and last but not the least, North Sumatra at 2%. Thank you, Indonesia, for supporting this podcast because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world, like Mr. Jeff Berney. Mr. Jeff, The Fall of Faith. What behind the title of your second book?
The title, I think, is I always try, I struggle with titles. And sometimes I write them before I've written the book, and sometimes they don't show up until the end. This one kind of, I started with The Fall of Faith, and I'm a big believer in double meanings. And so this book, for the most part, the action happens in the autumn or the fall. And faith is a big part of it, but it's not necessarily religious faith. There is some of that, but it's kind of this bigger faith in who you are and humanity as a whole. And there's another kind of tertiary meaning of faith that, as you read the book, you kind of understand.
Wow, sounds interesting, Mr. Jeff. So, The Fall of Faith. How did you crafted it?
The I start with I kind of use if there are other writers listening, I use this what's called the snowflake method. And so I start with one sentence. And it's almost, to me, it's kind of that what if kind of sentence. What if this trucker who has had a hard life gets stuck in the middle of nowhere and finds love for the first time? And so that's where it starts, and then I kind of build from there. And I usually end up with like a 3 or 4 page, almost, it's almost like I write a book report before the book has been written in my head, and that kind of helps me as I go. And then I'll do a quick outline, and from there, like I said, I leave some space for the characters to take over. I leave some space for things to happen that I didn't anticipate when I first um, came up with the idea for the book. When you're writing a bunch of characters, they do tend to come to life in your head. And as you know, for me as a writer, the more I get to know my characters, the more they'll do things that consciously I don't feel like, oh, that was my idea. It's almost like, oh, that was their idea. But hey, I'm going to go with it because it feels right for that character in this moment. And I go into it knowing the end, but most of the time the end changes a little bit as I'm writing, because I have kind of that large landing area where I'm like, okay, this is kind of where I'm going to wrap the story up. But again, I leave that room for, what if a character does something that I'm not anticipating and it makes a better ending. So I outline, but I'm not so rigid about it that I can't make changes as I go. And I think that's what helps a story feel real to a reader. It's not like you're reading a report. You're reading a cool story, as if someone was telling it to you, or as if they were relating something that actually happened. And that's really my goal.
Very well said, Mr. Jeff. And according to Miss Emily Terry, hold on tight. So, what are the elements that you put in the story that make your readers glued to it?
Oh, that's a great question. I I always hope that happens, and so far I've gotten lucky. It does happen. Um, I always try to anticipate. I'm the kind of reader who when I'm reading a story or a book or even watching a movie, I anticipate the character's next moves. I'm like, oh, if I was writing it, this would happen. And sometimes I'm right and sometimes I'm wrong, but I feel like I want to write for readers like me, and I want to make sure that if I think something if is going to happen, I'm not going to let that happen. I'm going to do something different. It'll still feel real to the characters and to the story, but I want those twists in there. And so I think that's what I hear most from my readers is, oh, I didn't see that ending coming, or oh, when this happened, it was amazing, but I didn't know that it was going to happen. So for me, it's crafting those little moments that are like, oh my gosh, I've got to talk to somebody about this. And that's what I think keeps readers coming back.
Yes, and according to Mr. Adam, be solid. What are the solid information that you want to share in the novel?
Yes, yes. I don't want to spoil anything, but for me, I do want to make people think about how we interact with other people. I do want to look at love and even kind of the baser than that, lust and what makes people act the way they do, particularly when you're in the moment and you meet someone new and you're falling in love for the first time. You can do some really crazy things all in the name of love, right? And so I wanted to kind of put that on steroids, go over the top with it. And what would someone do? Would they give everything they have for someone that they are falling in love with? Would they give all of themselves? Would they give their life? What would they do? And wrapped up in that is all these other crazy side characters who are pulling at the main characters from left and right, and you never know who to trust in this book. I think that's another thing that I try to bring to all my stories is you're not exactly sure who the good guy is. You're not exactly sure if you should be rooting for somebody. Sometimes someone might seem evil, but you get enough of a complete view of their life, and they're not just a one-dimensional bad guy. And so that's kind of what I like to bring also.
What inspired you to write The Fall of Faith?
You know what? I don't know where this story came from. I sat down to write I sat down to write a different book, and that happens to me a lot, actually. I'll sit down and I've got an idea for a book, but I've got a notebook full of ideas, and sometimes one idea will um, be louder in my head than others. And this one, I think I just wanted to explore. I think with both my books so far, but this one in particular, I wanted to explore the dark side of love. It's not always roses and hearts and happy endings. There's a lot of, emotional back and forth and tug of war internally and with the person that you're in love with. In real life, uh, you have those moments where you don't always understand the person you love. You may love them unconditionally, but there are things that maybe you don't understand or don't even like about the person, but you still, for some reason, are drawn to them. And that to me is a super powerful emotion. And that's where I started with the idea for this one.
Can you describe the research process behind The Fall of Faith?
Yeah, as a thriller writer, I don't I don't do a lot of in-depth research. I have a lot of respect for historical kind of novelists who do a bunch of research and understand exactly the time period they're writing in, or even fantasy or science fiction authors who create an entire world beyond the one that we live in. For me, my stories are based, in mostly in current times or close to it. They're based, I live in the middle of the United States, so they're kind of based in the area that I'm familiar with. So I'll do some research on the setting. I'll do some research on for this one. I looked at a lot of information and articles about small towns in middle America. I wanted to get the descriptions right. Again, as a novelist, I like to, go over the top and take a little bit of, exercise some liberty there when I'm describing things. But I want to make the worlds that I'm building at least feel like you could come to this small town that I'm talking about and recognize the corner store or the bar or the church or the little old lady's house that are all in this story. And it would feel like you just stepped into the pages of my book. So I try to incorporate places and bits of people that I know, and then I just build from that.
Mr. Jeff, what the challenges did you face while writing The Fall of Faith?
You know, I think the biggest challenge for me, and this is overall, not just this book, is like I said, I write these really dark, twisted thrillers, and for me, going into that dark part of my mind every day, day after day, it feels like at the end of a story, it's just taken a toll on me, and I need a break. And for this one, it was super dark. There's some things that happen in this novel that are um, just flat out like bad and twisted, and there are characters who act in a way that I despise, and which is crazy because I created these characters, But um, that kind of takes a toll on me, and is challenging. And just as an author in general, looking at, I'm writing 90 to 100,000 words, being able to keep myself focused and keep going and trust that process is always a challenge for me because there's always some part, you know, as you're deep into a novel where it's like, is this any good? Is it going anywhere? Is anyone going to read it? And you kind of have to ignore all of that noise and just keep going and trust the process. And so far for me, that's worked.
Very well said, Mr. Jeff. So, but before we go on, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, Food 101, our third season with Chef Alessandro, one of the best executive chef in one of the best restaurant in downtown Toronto. And listen to our latest episode. We talk about truffles. Truffles, people, one of the expensive ingredients in the kitchen are called the black diamond in the kitchen. So, plus one more. Our books are out, not only one, but seven, not eight volumes, people. Food 101, Volume 1. Basics is all we need how to create a delicious food. Available on Amazon and leading online bookstores worldwide. So, Mr. Jeff, The Fall of Faith, what is the best highlight?
Ooh, that's a tough one without giving anything away. I think um, for me, one of the highlights is as the main character Jimmy is in this town that he doesn't know. He befriends a bartender, and he also befriends a priest at the local church. And it was interesting. His interactions kind of I didn't realize it until I was in the middle of writing it that sometimes a bartender and a priest have very similar jobs. People come to them with problems and expect solutions, and both of them are very good at telling stories and very good at capturing people's attention. And so that was an interesting kind of give and take that I wasn't even expecting as someone who's writing it. So I think that's something that hopefully is interesting for people who read it.
What's one thing or message you hope readers will take away from The Fall of Faith?
I hope that after they're done reading it, they think about their relationships a little bit differently and think about the people in their lives and how much they mean to them and maybe hold on to them a little bit tighter.
Yes, can you share a memorable reader feedback or interaction that you had a significant impact on you?
Yeah, I had one review, one reader who said that they'd never read anything quite like The Fall of Faith before, and that my writing kind of reminded them of a mix of Kurt Vonnegut and David Lynch. And, for me, that was just super high praise and amazing. I try to build in chaos into my books, and to have um, people see that and appreciate it is amazing. I had another reader who, I tell people this is a gritty domestic thriller, and one reader said, "Oh my gosh, when you said gritty, you meant gritty. I felt like I needed a shower after reading this book." So I've gotten some pretty good feedback so far.
And how do you handle criticism, both constructive and negative?
I try to listen to both. Honestly, I am a newish author. I know I write for a living, but it's advertising. And it's definitely a different thing. And as a novelist, as a new novelist, I want to know where can I improve. And so I've had people who haven't liked my books, and when there are things that I can learn from that, I try to do that. There's an audience for every book, but not every audience is for your book, and I try to remind myself of that as well. So I don't necessarily worry about the critical feedback as much as I used to. It's still hard to hear, but I want to hear it. I want to know, okay, is that something I can really work on and interject into my next work? Is it something that would make my next book better, or is it just someone's opinion, which is totally valid and totally fine for that reader, but not something I can learn from or change? And so that's and then the really good praise, I try to take that with a grain of salt so that I don't feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be the next worldwide sensation novelist. I wouldn't turn that down, but uh, I don't expect it.
Like Thomas Harris. Do you have any advice for aspiring writers out there?
Yeah, just keep going. Trust that your story is worth telling, and that you can tell it in a way that nobody else can. So if you don't, that story is never going to get told. So do it.
Do it, people. Stop procrastinating. So,
Yes.
Mr. Jeff, how has the publishing process been for you?
I'm an independent author. So I do everything. I do have my books edited. I do have professional designer do my covers, but in terms of uh, writing, laying out, publishing, all of that is on my shoulders. And I actually, I kind of enjoy that part just as much as I enjoy the writing. I feel like I almost feel like, I'm a small business here, and writing is a huge part of it, but it's only one part. And then figuring out how to market the book, um, how to write the blurb, how to set up the images in the stores, that's all exciting and fun to me as well.
Yes, indeed. So, what's the most rewarding aspect of being an author?
For me, well, the biggest reward for me is my wife is my first reader. And if she enjoys the story, then I know, okay, this is good. I can publish this. And then I think the next highest reward is when I get my first few reviews of people that I don't know. Knowing that, hey, someone out there that I am not connected with in any way found my book and enjoyed my story. That to me is a very fulfilling part of being a novelist.
Certainly. So, how do you feel about the current state of publishing nowadays, especially with the rise of self publishing?
Yeah, I think it's a crazy time. I think um, it's hard to get your books out in front of people. And I think that's, you know, the same thing that authors face, whether they're traditionally published or self published. Unless you're Stephen King or someone huge that has been successful for decades, even traditional publishers aren't going to spend a whole lot of marketing dollars promoting a book. And so a lot of it has fallen on the authors. So I feel like in in one way, it's a very hard time to get noticed, but in the other, in you know point of view, there's a lot more parity between self-published and traditionally published authors. We're all out there hustling. We're all out there trying to get people to notice our books and give them a try. And I think that kind of leveling of the playing field in the long run is a good thing for authors.
If you go back and give advice to yourself when you were first starting out as a writer, what would it be?
Well, first, I wish I had started sooner. you know, I I had dreamed of writing a novel for years and years and years and years, and like a lot of people, um, thought, oh, that's a pipe dream. Oh, that's something that other people do, not not normal people, right? And so I would tell my younger self to just start, to just write, to tell the stories that you want to tell. But I think, to answer your question, when I was starting, I had a lot of stops and starts. I didn't necessarily trust myself or the process. I had a lot of feelings of, am I just being an imposter? Am I worthy of being a novelist? And I think those are, looking back now, I think that's just craziness. Like, everyone can tell a story, and not everyone is an amazing writer, but you don't have to be an amazing writer to be a great storyteller. I mean, editors will help you polish your prose so that it um, feels very natural as people are reading it. It's that story, it's that uniqueness that you bring as a person and your point of view on the world that nobody else has. That's the thing that I think you need to trust and um, just go with that.
Very well said, Mr. Jeff. Can you please invite our listeners to buy The Fall of Faith?
Yes, you can find The Fall of Faith really anywhere you shop for books online, whether that's Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Google Play, Apple Books, Kobo, um, all kinds of smaller online outlets as well. You can buy it directly from my website, also jeffberney.com, JEFFBERNEY.com.
People, let's support Mr. Jeff Berney because if you support him, more books to come. So, Mr. Jeff, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Daniel. This has been fun.
More to come, people. See you soon.